Silent battles, where the spirit speaks louder than the flesh. There are wars that shake the world, and there are wars that no one sees. Wars that take place in the silence of a room, inside the mind, in the hidden corners of the soul. These are silent battles, moments when the flesh screams for comfort, pleasure, revenge, or recognition, while the spirit whispers, "Be still and trust." The greatest wars of faith are not fought on battlefields, but within hearts that wrestle between surrender and resistance, obedience and rebellion, spirit and flesh. Every believer faces this unseen conflict. It is not a war that ends once you believe in God, rather it begins there. When your soul awakens to the voice of the Spirit, the flesh panics. It fights to stay in control. It resists every attempt to crucify its desires. It disguises its rebellion as logic, pride, fear, or even self-preservation. Yet in the depths of this struggle, the Spirit continues to speak, softly, steadily, calling you to rise above what is natural and embrace what is divine. This is the mystery of spiritual maturity, learning to discern the whisper of the Spirit amid the screams of the flesh. It is in the stillness of surrender that strength is found. God does not shout over chaos. He calls you into the quiet, where His peace becomes your weapon and His presence becomes your victory. In this journey through silent battles, we will explore the inner war every soul must face, the ways the Spirit speaks through stillness, and how the silence of faith can drown out the noise of temptation. This is not a message about escaping conflict. It's a revelation about transforming within it. For when the Spirit speaks louder than the flesh, you discover what true freedom feels like, peace that no storm can touch. The hidden war within. When the flesh fights for control, the silent battle begins where no one else can see. It doesn't announce itself with sound, yet its impact can shake your entire being. Every morning when you wake up, this war quietly resumes. Your spirit longs to pray, to align with God, to start the day anchored in truth. But the flesh pulls you toward distraction, comfort, and control. It tells you that there's no time for prayer, that your problems are too urgent, that surrender is weakness. And if you listen long enough, its voice becomes the background noise of your life. This is the first layer of the battle, the constant tension between surrendering and self-relying. The flesh's greatest illusion is independence. It tells you that you must handle everything alone, that to depend on God is to risk disappointment. But the Spirit knows the truth. The more you fight in your own strength, the weaker you become. The more you surrender to divine guidance, the more you begin to see through the fog. The Apostle Paul described this war with painful honesty. "For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing." Romans 7:19. His words expose the universal truth that within every believer lives a duality, the redeemed spirit and the rebellious flesh. These two natures cannot coexist in peace. One must yield for the other to thrive. The flesh craves immediate satisfaction. It wants results now, comfort now, validation now. It fears silence because silence exposes its emptiness. It hates prayer because prayer kills pride. The Spirit, on the other hand, operates in patience, faith, and unseen growth. It whispers through conviction, not coercion. It teaches you to wait, to trust, to walk by faith even when nothing around you confirms it. One of the greatest weapons of the flesh is noise. It fills your days with distractions, social media, endless comparison, overthinking, and constant activity, so you never sit long enough to hear the Spirit. The world glorifies noise because noise numbs awareness, but silence is where truth rises. When you dare to step into stillness, you begin to feel the tension between the Spirit's peace and the flesh's panic. The silence that once felt empty becomes holy ground. The flesh cannot be negotiated with. It must be crucified daily. That means choosing obedience when disobedience seems easier. It means forgiving when bitterness feels justified. It means being kind when anger feels more natural. These are the moments when silent battles are won, not in shouts, but in quiet decisions of faith. Every time you choose spirit over impulse, you break another chain that once controlled you. There's something sacred about the hidden war. God uses it to purify your motives, test your loyalties, and strengthen your dependence on Him. When you fight in silence, heaven watches closely. The victory that no one sees becomes the foundation for the destiny everyone will one day witness. And even when you fall, because you will, the Spirit never condemns. It convicts. It calls you back to the truth that victory is not perfection, it's perseverance. The Spirit's voice says, "Stand again, I am not finished with you." The flesh shouts, "You've failed too much to be restored." But remember, the flesh speaks from guilt, the Spirit speaks from grace. The difference between defeat and redemption is which voice you choose to believe. So when you feel torn between what you want and what you know is right, pause, step into silence. That's where the Spirit speaks the loudest. The battle isn't proof of your weakness. It's evidence that you're still fighting for truth. Every believer who dares to walk by faith must pass through this war. And those who endure find a strength the flesh will never understand. When you begin to value silence more than stimulation, stillness more than struggle, and surrender more than control, you'll realize something profound. The flesh has no real power over a spirit that listens. The Spirit doesn't need to shout to be heard. It only needs your attention. And when you give it, every internal storm begins to calm. Your greatest victories will not come from what you do publicly, but from what you overcome privately. The real transformation happens when no one is watching, when your tears fall unseen, and when your soul whispers, "God, I still choose you." That's where heaven writes your triumph. If this truth has stirred your spirit and reminded you of your own inner battles, take a moment now to reflect. And if you wish to walk deeper into the wisdom of the Spirit, remember to subscribe to the channel. Every message shared here is meant to help you walk faithfully in silence, where the Spirit speaks louder than the flesh. The voice of stillness. How the Spirit speaks in quiet moments. There is a reason why God often chooses silence to speak. The voice of the Spirit is not born in the thunder of chaos, but in the still breeze that comes after the storm. The flesh, by its nature, is loud. It demands, it insists, it argues. It fills every space with noise because it fears what might happen if silence takes over. Silence exposes truth. It reveals motives. It confronts distractions. And the Spirit dwells precisely there, where stillness strips away illusions and reveals what truly governs the heart. Many people search for God in extraordinary manifestations, waiting for a burning bush, a voice from heaven, or a miracle that breaks the natural order. But the Spirit, in its wisdom, teaches that divine revelation is often wrapped in simplicity. It is not that God is silent, it is that we rarely stop long enough to listen. In a world addicted to noise, stillness becomes a spiritual rebellion. Every moment you choose quiet over chaos, prayer over performance, you are declaring that your spirit, not your flesh, will lead your life. When Elijah fled into the wilderness, desperate and afraid, he expected God to appear in fire or earthquake, just as he had in the days of Moses. But Scripture says that God was not in the wind, not in the earthquake, and not in the fire. Then came a gentle whisper, and in that whisper Elijah recognized the Lord. The Spirit speaks the same way today. His words are not meant to compete with the world's volume. They are meant to transform your perception. The quieter your surroundings become, the clearer His presence feels. The problem is that silence is uncomfortable for the flesh. The moment you step into stillness, your mind begins to run. You remember your failures, your fears, your unfinished plans. The flesh panics because stillness reveals how dependent it is on movement. It thrives in noise because noise distracts from emptiness. The Spirit, however, is never afraid of stillness. In fact, it is in silence that it finds its strength. To walk by the Spirit is to learn how to be still without being stagnant, to move internally toward peace while the world spins around you. This is why prayer without stillness becomes noise, and worship without listening becomes performance. The flesh prays to speak, the Spirit prays to hear. The flesh seeks blessings, the Spirit seeks presence. When you learn to sit quietly in God's presence, without demanding answers or signs, something powerful happens. Your spirit begins to recalibrate. The voice of the Spirit, once faint and distant, becomes like a current running through your thoughts. It doesn't shout, it aligns. It doesn't argue, it guides. The voice of the Spirit never contradicts peace. When you feel anxious, pressured, or restless, that is the language of the flesh. When you feel convicted yet calm, stretched yet secure, that is the Spirit leading you. The Spirit's whisper is not about urgency. It's about clarity. It won't always tell you what you want to hear, but it will always lead you toward truth, humility, and freedom. Learning to hear the Spirit in stillness is not an instant process. It is a discipline. You must train your mind to slow down, your heart to yield, and your body to rest. Every day, your inner life becomes a battleground of voices: fear, pride, guilt, comparison, desire. Each one fights to define you. But above them all, there is one voice that never changes. The voice of your Creator calling you by name. It is not angry, it is not impatient. It is the sound of love that has no condition, guiding you back home every time you wander. In the stillness of the Spirit, you learn that guidance is not something you chase. It is something you receive. You stop trying to control outcomes and start aligning with divine rhythm. The flesh rushes, the Spirit flows. The flesh panics when doors close. The Spirit waits, knowing that God opens what truly belongs to you. The more you quiet the inner noise, the more life begins to feel orchestrated by something greater than your plans. This is why Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray. He understood that stillness was not an escape, but an empowerment. The miracles of his ministry were birthed in the silence of communion. He did not perform from exhaustion, but from alignment. His power flowed not from striving, but from surrender. The same invitation stands before you, to return to the stillness where strength is born. When the Spirit speaks, it does not always come in words. Sometimes it comes as conviction, a deep sense of knowing that guides you without logic. Sometimes it comes as peace in the middle of chaos, as if the world's noise cannot touch the calm within you. Sometimes it comes through delay, when doors remain closed, not because God is ignoring you, but because He's protecting you from something your flesh cannot yet see. The Spirit's language is divine timing. It never rushes, never reacts. It simply reveals when the moment is right. And when it does, you realize that every silent season was preparation for clarity. Silence is not absence, it is gestation. What feels like nothing is actually the ground of everything God is forming within you, but the flesh hates waiting. It confuses stillness with stagnation. It equates movement with progress and silence with abandonment. That's why learning to be still is one of the greatest spiritual disciplines. It kills the illusion that control equals power. In truth, surrender is the highest form of power, because it places you in alignment with divine purpose. To truly hear the Spirit, you must unlearn the habits of noise. You must create space for stillness, space to listen, to feel, to discern. When your day is filled with voices from the world, you begin to forget what the voice of truth sounds like. But when you withdraw, even for a few moments, you realign your frequency with heaven. You will know the Spirit's voice by its fruit. It brings peace even when it corrects. It brings direction even when it delays. It brings strength even when it breaks pride. The Spirit's whisper never manipulates, it liberates. It doesn't demand perfection, it invites transformation. And it always points you back to Christ, reminding you that victory begins in surrender, not striving. Every silent battle is an invitation to listen deeper. The louder your flesh becomes, the closer your spirit is to breakthrough. When the noise rises, don't shout back. Go deeper into silence. There, in the quiet, the Spirit will show you what the noise was trying to hide. It will expose fears you didn't know ruled you, heal wounds you thought were forgotten, and remind you that peace is not the absence of war, but the awareness of God's presence within it. The world fears silence because silence forces introspection. It reveals that pleasure cannot fill the void, success cannot silence anxiety, and distraction cannot replace communion. But the believer who embraces silence walks in a different kind of authority. They are not moved by the chaos around them because they are anchored in the voice within them. They don't react, they respond. They don't seek control, they surrender to guidance. And in that surrender, they find unshakable peace. The Spirit's stillness is not passive, it is powerful. It transforms chaos into clarity, fear into faith, doubt into revelation. It does not need to prove itself because truth, once revealed, speaks for itself. The more you dwell in this stillness, the more your flesh loses its grip. You stop reacting to every emotional wave because your roots go deeper than temporary storms. You begin to see that every temptation, every delay, every unanswered prayer has one purpose: to teach you to listen to the Spirit above all else. The Spirit's whisper can redirect an entire destiny if you're quiet enough to hear it. And once you learn to recognize that voice, no imitation from the flesh can deceive you again. So if you feel that God is silent in your life, perhaps He is simply inviting you to be silent with Him. Not every silence is absence. Some silences are sanctuaries. Some are healing rooms for the soul. Some are classrooms where your faith learns what words cannot teach. When you stop fighting the silence and start resting in it, you realize that the Spirit has been speaking all along. You were just too busy listening to everything else. Let this be your practice. Find moments of stillness in each day, not just to escape the world, but to enter into divine alignment. Turn off the noise, silence the notifications, breathe and listen. The more you honor those moments, the more naturally you will hear the Spirit's guidance in everything: your work, your relationships, your decisions, your future. God still speaks through stillness. His voice has not weakened with time. It is waiting for those who are willing to lower the volume of the flesh and amplify the frequency of the Spirit. And when you finally hear it, not with your ears but with your heart, you will know that it was never about doing more, but about becoming more aligned. In the end, the voice of the Spirit doesn't compete with the flesh. It transcends it. It teaches you that true strength is not found in noise or movement, but in inner stillness, the kind that allows you to walk through storms with unshaken faith. If this message spoke to your spirit today, take a moment to reflect, breathe, and listen. And before you go, remember to subscribe to the channel so you can keep walking this journey of faith, silence, and transformation, learning to let the Spirit speak louder than the flesh. The discipline of silence, transforming chaos into communion. The discipline of silence is not the absence of sound. It is the mastery of the soul. It is the ability to stand still when everything within you wants to react, to remain calm when every emotion rises against you, and to listen when the world demands that you speak. Silence is the language of heaven. It is where the Spirit teaches you to unlearn the impulses of the flesh and to hear what cannot be spoken in words. Most people live enslaved by their reactions. They are driven by noise, urgency, and emotion. But those who have tasted silence know that true strength lies not in expression, but in restraint. In a world filled with endless stimulation, silence has become one of the rarest spiritual disciplines. The flesh despises silence because it reveals truth. It wants to speak first, move first, and decide first. The Spirit waits. The Spirit observes. The Spirit listens. The difference between the two is patience. The flesh acts from impulse. The Spirit acts from wisdom. To walk by the Spirit is to cultivate the sacred art of silence, not silence as avoidance, but silence as alignment. The discipline of silence is what separates those who react from those who discern. Every time you choose to pause instead of speak, to listen instead of argue, to pray instead of panic, you are practicing this discipline. The flesh fears being still, because stillness exposes dependence. It cannot stand waiting, because waiting feels like weakness. But in spiritual reality, waiting is power restrained. It is the soul learning to submit its timing to God's timing, its desire to divine order. When chaos rises around you, when life becomes unpredictable, when betrayal cuts deep, when prayers seem unanswered, the first instinct of the flesh is to complain. It seeks to vocalize its pain, to be heard, to justify itself. But the Spirit whispers, "Be still." The Spirit invites you to remain silent, not because your pain is irrelevant, but because your reaction determines your growth. Silence in suffering is not denial, it is surrender. It is telling God, "I trust your hand, even when I do not understand your plan." There are moments when God deliberately leads you into seasons of silence, not to punish you, but to purify you. In silence, distractions die, pride begins to crumble. You stop fighting for recognition and start seeking revelation. In those moments, you learn that communion with God is not built on constant talking, but on constant awareness. The Spirit doesn't need noise to communicate. It needs stillness to be heard. Consider how Jesus lived in silence, even amid accusation. When he stood before Pilate, falsely accused and condemned by men who did not understand his purpose, he did not defend himself. He remained silent because his truth did not need to be proven. It was already established. That silence was not weakness. It was divine mastery. It was the Spirit ruling the flesh, peace ruling fear, eternity ruling momentary injustice. The same Spirit that sustained Christ in silence dwells in you. When you practice silence, you are not suppressing emotion, you are sanctifying it. You are telling your soul that not every storm deserves a reaction. You are teaching your mind to trust what faith already knows. The flesh thrives on immediacy. It wants to respond now, justify now, fix now, but the Spirit moves on eternal rhythm. It does not rush because time belongs to it. The more you live in the Spirit, the more you realize that silence is not passive, it is preparation. The discipline of silence builds spiritual endurance. It teaches you to hold your peace while God fights your battles. It strengthens your ability to wait without losing hope. It refines your discernment so you can distinguish between the voice of your emotion and the voice of truth. When you walk in silence, you begin to perceive what others overlook, the subtle guidance of the Spirit, the quiet conviction before a wrong decision, the peace that precedes breakthrough. Silence transforms chaos into communion because it redirects focus. Instead of feeding on fear, you feed on faith. Instead of rehearsing problems, you rehearse promises. Every quiet moment becomes a meeting place with God. You stop begging for answers and start beholding His presence. It's not about forcing divine intervention, it's about aligning with divine intention. In silence, your prayers deepen. Words become unnecessary because the Spirit begins to intercede through groanings too deep for language. You realize that the greatest prayers are not always spoken. They are felt, they are breathed, they are lived. Silence becomes your prayer posture, and stillness becomes your worship. There's a reason why the greatest prophets and saints withdrew into solitude. Moses met God on a mountain of silence. Elijah heard him in the whisper. Jesus prayed alone in the wilderness. These moments of isolation were not voids, they were sanctuaries. They were the wombs of divine revelation, where men and women were emptied of self so they could be filled with God. Silence is not emptiness. It is sacred preparation. The flesh sees silence as loneliness, but the spirit sees it as intimacy. The deeper you enter into silence, the more you begin to recognize that you are never truly alone. You begin to feel the nearness of the Spirit, not as noise but as presence, as a constant awareness that you are seen, known, and guided. Silence becomes communion, the meeting place between the eternal and the temporal. But this discipline requires dying to self daily. It means resisting the urge to defend yourself when misunderstood, to react when offended, to speak when silence would honor God more. It means holding peace when your ego demands a response. Every time you choose silence in moments of provocation, you declare that your spirit has dominion over your flesh. You break the cycle of reaction and step into the rhythm of revelation. Silence does not mean inaction. It is the pause before divine direction. When you silence the flesh, you make room for wisdom. You stop praying from anxiety and start praying from authority. You stop reacting to circumstances and start responding to guidance. The difference between reaction and response is time, and silence is what fills that space with divine wisdom. The flesh believes that speaking louder gives it power. But the Spirit knows that the quiet heart commands heaven. When you learn to be silent, you are not ignoring your circumstances. You are elevating above them. You are saying, "My peace is not negotiable." You are declaring that you will not let external chaos dictate your internal condition. The discipline of silence transforms how you see everything. It teaches you that not every battle deserves your words, not every argument deserves your energy, and not every storm requires your fear. Silence reveals that some things are better surrendered than solved. It shows that the Spirit's way of victory often looks like stillness before it looks like breakthrough. When you cultivate this discipline, people may misinterpret your silence. They may see it as weakness, detachment, or passivity. But silence guided by the Spirit is none of those things. It is discernment. It is knowing when to speak and when to be still, when to act and when to wait. The mature believer understands that timing is sacred and that silence is often the bridge between confusion and clarity. Silence also heals. It allows your soul to process pain without infecting others with bitterness. It gives your wounds time to close under the light of God's presence instead of the noise of human interference. Many believers delay their healing because they keep speaking from open wounds. They keep rehearsing hurt instead of releasing it. But in silence, you stop bleeding words and start breathing forgiveness. The Spirit cannot heal what you keep reopening with speech. To embrace silence is to step into a deeper trust. It means believing that God's justice will speak louder than your defense. It means allowing His timing to reveal what your explanation never could. Silence is faith's testimony. It is confidence that truth doesn't need noise to be known. God often asks you to stay silent, not to silence your pain, but to protect your purpose. Some battles are won not by what you say, but by what you refuse to say. Through silence, you also begin to perceive how much the flesh depends on validation. The need to be understood, justified, or affirmed is the flesh's way of maintaining control. The Spirit frees you from that need. It teaches you that being right before God is more important than being recognized by people. Once that truth takes root, you experience a freedom that no human opinion can shake. The discipline of silence reveals how much you truly trust God. When you can remain still while the storm rages, when you can hold peace while others panic, when you can listen while others shout, that is faith made visible. Silence becomes your declaration that God is still in control, even when nothing makes sense. But this discipline cannot be learned through comfort. It is forged in chaos. It is learned in the moments when everything within you wants to react, but the Spirit says, wait. It is born in the tension between injustice and obedience, between pain and purpose. Every trial becomes a classroom, and every moment of silence becomes a lesson in divine endurance. The greatest miracles in Scripture often came after silence. The walls of Jericho fell only after 7 days of silent marching. Zacharias received his voice back only after months of wordless waiting. Even creation itself began in silence. Before God said, "Let there be light," there was stillness over the void. Silence is not a delay in God's power. It is the stage for its revelation. The more you practice silence, the more you realize that it is not about escaping the world, but transforming your place within it. You become more anchored, more discerning, more attuned to divine rhythm. You stop being a prisoner of external chaos and become an instrument of inner peace. You begin to move not from reaction, but from revelation, and your life starts to reflect divine order rather than human impulse. In a world where everyone seeks to be heard, the one who listens becomes the one who leads. Silence gives birth to wisdom, and wisdom gives birth to authority. True authority doesn't need to shout. It carries presence. When you walk in the Spirit's silence, people sense peace around you that cannot be explained. That peace is not natural, it is spiritual. It is the fruit of a life trained to hear God before hearing itself. This is how chaos becomes communion. Every moment that once caused anxiety becomes an altar of awareness. You stop asking, "Why is this happening?" and start asking, "What are you teaching me through this?" You stop resisting silence and start revering it. You learn that silence is not an interruption to prayer. It is its highest form. It is where communication ends and communion begins. When silence becomes your discipline, you no longer fear it. You welcome it as a friend, as a teacher, as the place where your soul meets truth. You no longer see it as absence, but as presence, because now you understand that in silence, God is closest, and in that closeness, chaos loses its voice. If these words have spoken to your spirit, let them settle in your heart. Learn to practice silence not as a punishment, but as a path to presence. And before you leave, remember to subscribe to the channel so you can continue walking deeper into this journey of spiritual discipline, learning to transform every moment of chaos into communion through the sacred art of silence. When the Spirit commands peace, the strength of inner stillness, there is a peace that the world cannot give and a stillness that no storm can shake. It is not found in perfect circumstances, nor in a life free from struggle. It is the peace that rises from within when the Spirit commands the storm of the flesh to be silent. This peace is not fragile, it is forged. It is not the absence of battle, but the presence of divine authority within the battle. When the Spirit commands peace, chaos loses its power because the authority of God always overrides the noise of man. Inner stillness is not weakness. It is warfare in a higher dimension. The flesh thrives on reaction. It wants to fight, to defend, to argue, to prove. But the Spirit's strength is different. It stands in silence while the world trembles. It trusts in God's justice when all human logic screams for control. The Spirit's stillness is not passivity, it is divine confidence. It knows that peace is not the reward at the end of battle. It is the power that carries you through it. Every believer must come to a moment where peace is no longer dependent on external order, but on internal alignment. The Spirit teaches that peace is not what happens when everything is right. Peace is what you carry when everything goes wrong. It is the supernatural calm that defies reason, that guards the heart when it should be breaking, that steadies the mind when it should be collapsing. And this peace is not learned through comfort, it is learned through surrender. The flesh interprets peace as comfort. The Spirit defines it as confidence in God's sovereignty. The flesh says, "I'll be at peace when the situation changes." The Spirit says, "I'll be at peace because I know who is in control." The flesh depends on the seen, the Spirit rests in the unseen. That is why the Spirit's peace is so powerful, because it doesn't rely on circumstances, it creates them. When Jesus calmed the storm on the sea, he didn't fight the wind or wrestle with the waves. He spoke one sentence, "Peace, be still." The storm obeyed, because the elements recognized their Creator's voice. The disciples were astonished, but they didn't realize the deeper truth. Jesus wasn't just calming the weather. He was revealing the spiritual principle of divine peace. The same voice that silenced the sea now dwells within you through the Spirit. When you align with that voice, you carry authority over every internal storm. To live in the Spirit's peace is to walk through chaos with unshaken composure. It means facing betrayal without bitterness, pain without panic, waiting without weariness. It means knowing that peace is not an escape, but a weapon. Every time you remain calm in conflict, every time you refuse to let fear dictate your faith, you are wielding divine strength. The flesh fights by noise. The Spirit conquers through peace, but peace does not come naturally. It is cultivated through discipline. You must train your soul to listen when your emotions demand reaction. You must learn to pause before responding, to pray before deciding, to breathe before speaking. Inner stillness is not automatic, it is intentional. You cannot command peace outwardly if you haven't allowed it to rule inwardly. The Spirit can only command peace through a vessel that is surrendered. Stillness becomes strength when it is rooted in trust. You cannot stand still before God until you believe He is truly working. You cannot rest in His timing until you trust His character. The flesh sees stillness as inactivity, but the Spirit sees it as participation in divine will. When you stop striving to fix everything, you create space for God to move. Many believers delay breakthrough because they keep fighting battles God already won. The Spirit's command of peace is an invitation to step out of the way so that divine order can take over. When the Spirit commands peace, it does not mean there will be no pain. It means the pain will no longer control you. It means you can grieve without despair. You can wait without anxiety. You can love without fear. This is the power of inner stillness. It allows you to move through fire without being consumed. It is not about pretending everything is fine. It is about standing firm because your spirit knows everything will be redeemed. To understand this peace, you must first experience the war that precedes it. True stillness is forged in the moments when your flesh screams for reaction and your spirit whispers, "Be still." It is learned in seasons when you have no answers, no solutions, and no strength left. Yet something within you refuses to panic. That something is not human resilience. It is divine rest. It is the Spirit teaching you that strength is not measured by resistance, but by surrender. The Spirit's stillness has nothing to do with apathy. It is not indifference to the world's chaos. It is mastery over it. It allows you to see clearly when everyone else is blinded by emotion. It allows you to act from wisdom, not impulse. When you walk in inner stillness, your presence itself becomes a weapon of peace. You become a mirror of heaven's calm amid earth's noise. There will be moments when your peace will offend others. The fleshly world cannot understand how someone can stay calm in crisis, how someone can remain kind in betrayal, or how someone can keep trusting when everything falls apart. But that is exactly how the Spirit's stillness reveals its power. It exposes the limits of human understanding and points to the divine nature within you. Your peace becomes a testimony louder than any sermon. You will also discover that the Spirit commands peace, not just for you, but through you. When your heart is anchored in stillness, your words begin to carry authority. You can walk into an atmosphere of confusion and shift it simply by being there. You can calm anxious hearts without preaching a single word, because peace is not only something you carry, It's something you transmit. The Spirit's peace flows through surrendered vessels, turning chaos into clarity wherever they go. To reach this level of stillness, you must confront your inner noise. Every fear, every worry, every hidden anxiety must be brought into the light. You cannot command peace while secretly feeding unrest. The Spirit will often lead you into seasons of silence precisely to expose what disturbs your inner world. These moments are uncomfortable because they force you to face what you've been avoiding. But once you confront your fears in God's presence, they lose their power. The Spirit cannot command peace in a heart that refuses to release control. You must also guard your peace like treasure. The world will constantly try to rob it through distraction, offense, and pressure. People will misunderstand your calm and provoke you to react. But when you value your peace more than your pride, you will no longer surrender it to temporary emotions. Every time you refuse to let offense steal your peace, you strengthen your spirit. Every time you choose silence over argument, prayer over panic, patience over frustration, you train your soul to live under divine authority. The Spirit's peace is not fragile, it is fierce. It stands unshaken before storms because it flows from eternal truth. When you build your peace on outcomes, it will crumble with disappointment. But when you build it on God's nature, it becomes indestructible. He does not change with the seasons, therefore neither does your peace. Circumstances may shift, people may leave, doors may close, but your stillness remains because it is anchored in the unchanging presence of the Spirit. This peace also brings clarity. The louder your emotions, the harder it is to hear direction. But when your soul becomes still, the voice of God becomes clear. He speaks most clearly to peaceful hearts because peace is His atmosphere. When your spirit is quiet, wisdom flows naturally. You stop chasing answers and start recognizing them. You realize that most of what you've been praying for was never lost. It was simply hidden beneath the noise. Inner stillness also teaches humility. It shows you that control was never yours to begin with. It humbles the flesh's arrogance and exalts God's sovereignty. The more you surrender, the more you realize that peace is not something you earn. It's something you receive. It's a divine gift that flows from faith, not effort. And like all spiritual gifts, it grows through practice. Every time you choose peace in chaos, you strengthen your alignment with heaven. The Spirit commands peace in the same way it commanded light in creation. When God said, "Let there be light," He wasn't suggesting. It was a decree. Darkness had no choice but to yield. In the same way, when the Spirit says, "Be still," the chaos within must obey. The only question is whether you will agree with that command or resist it. Every time you choose peace over panic, you are saying yes to that divine command. You are agreeing with heaven's decree over your life. Stillness becomes supernatural when it is maintained under pressure. Anyone can be calm when things go well. It takes divine maturity to remain calm when everything falls apart. The Spirit's peace is not dependent on explanations. It is rooted in trust. You don't have to know the why when you know the who. You stop demanding reasons because relationship becomes enough. This is why peace is not just emotional, it's spiritual warfare. When you remain calm in conflict, the enemy loses power over you. He thrives on reaction, on fear, on emotional chaos. But when you stay still, he cannot read your moves. He expects panic and finds peace instead. That confuses and disarms him because peace is the atmosphere of heaven, and hell cannot function in it. When the Spirit commands peace, it is not a request. It is a declaration of authority. It tells every fear to bow, every anxiety to flee, every lie to be silenced. It brings your mind back into alignment with truth. It reminds you that no situation is greater than the presence within you. That is why Scripture says, "The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. It guards because it reigns. It protects because it rules. The more you live under this peace, the less you are moved by life's storms. You begin to walk with quiet confidence, not because everything is perfect, but because you know the one who holds perfection in his hands. You face disappointment with grace, delay with patience, and even suffering with dignity. The Spirit's stillness gives you strength that cannot be seen, but can always be felt. It is the quiet fire that sustains you when words are no longer enough. Peace also restores perspective. When you are anxious, everything feels urgent. Every problem seems catastrophic. But when the Spirit restores stillness, you begin to see things as they are, not as fear paints them. You realize that much of what you worried about never came to pass. You understand that the timing of God is always perfect, even when it interrupts your plans. And you learn that sometimes the greatest miracle is not the change of circumstance, but the transformation of perception. There is a sacred paradox in the Spirit's command of peace. To surrender control is to gain authority. When you stop trying to force outcomes, you begin to operate from faith. You realize that God never asked you to carry the storm. He only asked you to trust him through it. Stillness is your act of obedience. It says, I will not move until you speak. I will not panic because you promised. That is faith in its purest form. As you grow in this stillness, you will begin to sense peace, not as an emotion, but as a presence. It becomes a living reality within you, a constant awareness of God's nearness. Even when the world moves in chaos, you feel that inner calm like an anchor holding you steady. And once you have experienced that level of peace, you will never trade it for anything lesser. You will protect it with discernment, defend it with boundaries, and nurture it with prayer. The Spirit's command of peace will shape your character. It will soften what was hard, quiet what was restless, and purify what was proud. It will make you gentle without making you weak, humble without making you small, calm without making you indifferent. It will teach you that the truest power lies not in dominance, but in surrender, not in control, but in trust. And when others see you walking through storms with unshaken calm, they will wonder how. They will ask what secret keeps you grounded, and you will know the answer. It was never a secret. It was the Spirit's stillness, the same peace that Jesus carried now alive in you. If this message touched your soul and reminded you of the peace that the Spirit can command within you, remember, this is not the end of your journey. Keep walking deeper into that stillness. Keep surrendering your storms to the one who calms them. And before you leave, subscribe to the channel so you can continue receiving messages that strengthen your spirit, anchor your soul, and teach you to live in the strength of divine peace, where every storm bows before the stillness of God. The final victory of silence. When the flesh yields and the Spirit reigns, there comes a moment in every believer's life when the long war within reaches its turning point. It is not the kind of victory that is loud or celebrated. It is a quiet triumph that happens deep inside, unseen by others, but felt by heaven. It is the moment when the flesh finally yields and the Spirit fully reigns. The noise that once ruled your thoughts begins to fade. The fear that used to paralyze you loses its hold, and you realize that what once felt like war has become worship. This is the final victory of silence, not the silence of defeat, but the silence of dominion. It is the stillness that comes when your spirit no longer fights for control, because it has already surrendered to God's control. The journey toward this victory is long and often painful. The flesh does not die quietly. It fights for survival until the end. It clings to its habits, its pride, its illusions of control. It tells you that letting go means losing yourself. But the Spirit knows that letting go is how you find yourself in God. The greatest paradox of faith is that surrender leads to sovereignty. When you stop fighting for your own will, you finally align with divine will. That is when peace becomes permanent, when silence becomes strength, and when obedience becomes effortless. This final silence is not the absence of movement, it is harmony with divine rhythm. Your thoughts, emotions, and desires no longer compete. They flow together under the direction of the Spirit. The same inner chaos that once made prayer difficult now becomes the very atmosphere of prayer. You stop trying to impress God with words and begin to dwell with Him in presence. This is not a silence of inactivity, but of intimacy, a quiet communion where your soul no longer seeks to be understood, but to understand. The flesh's greatest illusion is that control equals life. It believes that as long as it can manipulate outcomes, defend its image, and satisfy its desires, it is safe. But that safety is an illusion built on fear. The Spirit dismantles that illusion not to destroy you, but to free you. It shows you that control is the heaviest burden and surrender is the greatest relief. The moment the flesh yields, a deep peace enters, the kind that cannot be explained but only experienced. In this silence, you discover who you really are. The flesh always defines identity through doing, through achievements, relationships, failures, appearances. But the Spirit defines identity through being, through existence in God's design. You begin to see that your worth was never based on performance, but on presence. You are not what you do. You are who you are in Him. This revelation transforms how you live. You no longer act from fear of failure, but from fullness of faith. The Spirit's reign replaces striving with resting. This is the moment when prayer changes. It stops being a monologue of requests and becomes a dialogue of hearts. You stop asking God to change circumstances and start asking Him to change you. You stop measuring answers by outcomes and begin measuring them by awareness. Even unanswered prayers no longer feel like silence. They feel like preparation. You realize that divine delay is not denial, but design. In that understanding, the flesh's impatience dissolves, and the Spirit's patience grows. When the Spirit reigns, your perception of time changes. The flesh lives in hurry, the Spirit lives in eternity. You begin to see that waiting is not wasted. It is sacred. What feels like delay in the natural is acceleration in the spiritual. Every quiet season you once resented becomes a womb for revelation. You understand that the silence of God is not absence, but artistry, crafting depth within you. This realization frees you from anxiety because you stop trying to force divine timing. You live instead in alignment with divine rhythm. The final victory of silence also transforms how you see suffering. The flesh sees pain as punishment. The Spirit sees it as purification. When the Spirit reigns, even suffering becomes sacred. It becomes a refining fire that burns away everything false. You no longer ask, "Why me?" but "What are you forming in me?" Pain stops being an enemy and becomes a teacher. It reveals where the flesh still resists and where surrender is incomplete. The Spirit uses every ache as an altar, every wound as a window for light to enter. When the flesh finally yields, your reactions change. The things that once provoked you no longer have power. The words that once wounded you now pass through without piercing. You no longer feel the need to defend, argue, or prove, because your peace has become your shield. The Spirit teaches you that silence is not indifference, it is maturity. It is the choice to respond from wisdom, not emotion. The fewer words you need to maintain peace, the closer you are to divine understanding. You also begin to love differently. The flesh loves for comfort, the Spirit loves for transformation. The flesh gives to receive. The Spirit gives because it has already received. When the Spirit reigns, you love without agenda, without condition, without fear. You can bless those who curse you, forgive those who wound you, and pray for those who misunderstand you. This is not weakness. It is divine strength flowing through a vessel that no longer needs validation to love. This silence becomes your authority. People mistake loudness for power, but real power moves quietly. The sun does not shout to shine. It simply is. Likewise, a spirit at peace becomes radiant without effort. The presence of one person who has conquered inner chaos can calm an entire room. That is why saints and prophets were feared by kings. They carried stillness that could not be shaken. When the Spirit reigns, your very presence becomes a testimony. You no longer preach peace, you embody it. This final silence is also freedom from fear. The flesh fears loss, rejection, and death. But when the Spirit reigns, death itself loses its sting. You no longer fear what can be taken from you, because your treasure is no longer external. You no longer fear what people think, because your identity is anchored in God's gaze. You no longer fear the future, because you live in communion with the eternal. Fear requires noise. Peace requires stillness. When silence fills your soul, fear finds no place to hide. The reign of the Spirit transforms the ordinary into the sacred. Washing dishes, walking outside, breathing, listening, all become prayer. Every moment becomes an altar, because the presence of God is no longer confined to a place, but lives in awareness. This is what it means to pray without ceasing. It is not about words, but about consciousness. The Spirit turns your whole life into worship, your breath into praise, your silence into song. As this transformation deepens, humility becomes natural. The flesh thrives on recognition, but the Spirit delights in anonymity. When the Spirit reigns, you no longer need to be seen, because you know you are known by God. You no longer chase applause, because you are already accepted. This freedom from self-importance allows grace to flow unhindered. You realize that greatness in the kingdom is not about influence, but about intimacy. You begin to see others differently too. The Spirit opens your eyes to divine fingerprints in everyone. You stop judging people by their flaws, because you recognize the war they are fighting within. You see that the same Spirit working in you is working in them. Compassion replaces criticism, and patience replaces pride. Silence becomes the space where empathy grows, where you listen without needing to speak, where you love without needing to fix. In this state, temptation loses its power. The flesh once pulled you toward indulgence, toward self-gratification, toward rebellion. But now the Spirit fills those spaces with purpose. You no longer fight temptation with effort. You overcome it with fulfillment. When your soul is full of peace, sin loses its appeal. The things that once enslaved you become uninteresting because you have tasted something greater. This is the secret of holiness, not deprivation, but satisfaction in God. The final victory of silence is also the restoration of identity. You remember who you were before the noise, before fear, before failure. You recognize the image of God within, the same breath that spoke creation into existence now dwelling in your chest. You realize that you were never meant to live fragmented between flesh and spirit. You were meant to be whole. Silence becomes the bridge where division ends and unity begins. In this silence, obedience becomes joy. What once felt like sacrifice now feels like privilege. You no longer obey out of fear of punishment, but out of love for presence. The commandments of God cease to feel like restrictions and become revelations of wisdom. You discover that holiness is not about perfection, it is about alignment. The more you yield, the more natural righteousness feels. You stop forcing goodness and start flowing in grace. You will notice that even prayer shifts again. It becomes less about asking and more about beholding. Words diminish because awareness increases. Sometimes you will sit in complete silence for hours, and yet you will feel more connected to God than in the busiest church service. You will understand why the mystics spoke of the prayer of quiet, where the soul rests in the presence of God without effort. In that state, your very existence becomes prayer. When the Spirit reigns, even your dreams change. You no longer chase ambition for self, but purpose for others. You no longer measure success by achievement, but by alignment. You begin to walk through life with holy detachment, not indifference, but freedom. You can enjoy the blessings of life without being enslaved by them. You can experience pain without losing peace. You can love deeply without fear of loss. This is the freedom that silence brings, the ability to live fully without clinging to anything temporary. The final victory also reveals that silence is not the end, but the beginning. It is the threshold between human effort and divine operation. Once the flesh yields, the Spirit begins to work through you in ways you never imagined. You become a vessel of healing, wisdom, and love. You speak less, but when you do speak, your words carry weight. You move slower, but every step is guided. You plan less, but everything flows more perfectly. This is the paradox of surrender. The less you do in the flesh, the more God accomplishes through you. In the end, silence teaches you the greatest truth of all, that God was never far. He was always within, waiting for the noise to cease so that communion could begin. The final victory of silence is not about escaping the world, but redeeming it through peace. It is living in such alignment that heaven and earth meet within you. The Spirit does not erase your humanity. It perfects it. You become fully human and fully divine in purpose, reflecting the image of the one who created you. When this victory becomes real, gratitude overflows. Every breath feels sacred, every sunrise feels like grace. You begin to live in constant awe, knowing that the same God who calmed the sea now dwells in your still heart. You no longer chase miracles, you become one. You no longer look for peace, you carry it. You no longer seek to hear God's voice, you live in it. And this is the purpose of all your silent battles. Every struggle, every tear, every temptation, every season of confusion was leading you here, to the place where the flesh bows and the Spirit reigns. The noise that once defined you has become quiet, and in that quiet, the eternal voice of God resounds clearer than ever. So when you reach this place of final silence, do not be surprised if the world no longer understands you. It is not meant to. You now live by a higher frequency, one that cannot be explained but only experienced. You will walk through chaos and remain calm, move through pain and remain peaceful, face uncertainty and remain unshaken. You have become what Scripture describes as a temple of the Spirit, a living dwelling of divine peace. This is not perfection, it is union. The war within has ended not because one side destroyed the other, but because love reconciled them. The flesh no longer fights against the Spirit because it has been transformed by it. Desire is purified, thought is sanctified, and silence becomes the eternal language of your soul. And when the day comes that your journey on earth is complete, your final breath will not be fear, it will be peace. For the one who has conquered inner noise does not fear outer silence. Death itself becomes just another doorway into deeper stillness, where the Spirit that reigned within now returns fully to the source from which it came. Until that day, live in the rhythm of this silence. Let the Spirit rule every thought, every emotion, every word. Let peace be your crown and stillness your sword. For in the end, it is not the loud who inherit the earth, but the meek, the silent warriors whose hearts are anchored in divine calm. They are the ones who carry heaven wherever they go. If this message has spoken to your spirit, if it has reminded you that your true strength lies not in striving, but in surrender, then hold on to it. Let silence become your teacher. Let peace become your armor. And before you go, subscribe to the channel so that you may continue walking this sacred path where every battle ends in stillness and every storm bows before the reign of the Spirit.